Stray dog refuses to leave baby's side. The family's reaction is heartwarming. How will this story unfold? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. The quiet hum of a suburban afternoon was broken by the gentle creak of stroller wheels rolling over the sidewalk. Emily and Mark strolled through the neighborhood. Their 6-month-old baby, Lily, nestled snugly in her stroller. The golden rays of the late afternoon sun painted the scene with a warm glow, and the couple chatted softly as they walked. It was an ordinary day, or at least it had been. As they turned a corner, Emily felt a strange sensation, as if they were being watched. She glanced over her shoulder but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Just neatly trimmed lawns, parked cars, and the occasional flutter of curtains as neighbors peeked out their windows. Still, the feeling persisted. "Mark," she said, her voice low, "do you feel like someone's watching us?" Mark laughed, shaking his head. "You've been watching too many crime dramas," he teased. "It's probably just Mrs. Collins checking on us again. You know how nosy she can be." Emily chuckled, but the unease lingered. She glanced down at Lily, who was dozing peacefully, her tiny fists clenched around the straps of her stroller. The sight of her daughter's serene face brought a wave of calm, and Emily shook off her paranoia. But then it happened. From the shadows of a nearby alley, a shape emerged, a dog. Its coat was a mix of brown and white, matted in places and streaked with dirt. Its eyes, a piercing amber, locked onto the stroller as it approached cautiously, its movements deliberate but not aggressive. "Mark," Emily said, her voice sharp now. "There's a dog." Mark turned, his brow furrowing as he noticed the stray for the first time. "It's probably just looking for food," he said, stepping slightly in front of Emily and the stroller. "Let's keep walking." But as they moved, so did the dog. It followed at a steady pace, its gaze never leaving the stroller. Emily tightened her grip on the handle, her heart pounding. She couldn't tell if the dog was a threat or simply curious, but its persistence was unnerving. When they reached the park at the end of the street, Mark stopped and turned to face the dog. "Shoo," he said firmly, waving his hands. The dog paused, tilting its head as if considering his command, but it didn't leave. Instead, it sat down, its gaze unwavering. Emily glanced at the dog, her fear giving way to curiosity. There was something about its demeanor, calm, almost protective, that made her hesitate. It wasn't baring its teeth or barking, simply sat there as if standing guard. "It's not acting aggressive," she said softly. "Maybe it's lost." Mark frowned, still wary. "Maybe, but we can't just let it follow us. What if it has fleas? Or worse?" Before Emily could respond, Lily stirred in her stroller. She opened her eyes, her tiny face scrunching up in a yawn before her gaze landed on the dog. To Emily's surprise, Lily giggled, a bright, joyous sound that made the dog's ears perk up. "Well, she doesn't seem scared," Emily said with a laugh, her tension easing slightly. "In fact, I think she likes it." Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Let's just keep walking," he said. "Maybe it'll get bored and leave." But the dog didn't leave. It followed them all the way home, maintaining a respectful distance but never losing sight of the stroller. By the time they reached their front yard, Emily had grown used to its presence, though she was still unsure what to do. Mark turned to the dog one last time. "You can't stay here," he said firmly, pointing down the street. "Go on. Find your way home." The dog tilted its head, its amber eyes meeting his. Then, to their astonishment, it walked past them. Not away, but toward their porch. It curled up at the bottom of the steps, its body relaxed but its eyes alert, as if settling in for a vigil. Emily stared at the dog, her mind racing. "What do we do now?" Mark shrugged helplessly. "I don't know, but it looks like it's not going anywhere." That evening, the stray dog remained steadfast at the bottom of their porch steps. Its body was curled up tightly, but its amber eyes stayed open, watching the house intently. It neither barked nor whined, but its presence was impossible to ignore. Inside the house, Emily and Mark debated their next move. Lily had been fed and was now fast asleep in her crib, blissfully unaware of the ongoing discussion. "We can't just leave it out there all night," Emily said, peeking through the window at the dog. "It might be hungry or cold." Mark sighed, leaning against the kitchen counter. "And what are we supposed to do? Let it inside? What if it has diseases or fleas? We don't even know where it came from." Emily crossed her arms, her brow furrowing. "It doesn't seem dangerous, Mark. If anything, it's been calm and, dare I say it, protective. Did you see the way it watched Lily? It's like it was guarding her." "That's exactly why it's weird," Mark countered. "Why would a stray dog act like that? It's probably just looking for food. And once it realizes we're not feeding it, it'll move on." But the dog didn't move on. Even as the hours passed and darkness enveloped the neighborhood, it remained on the porch, its head resting on its paws. Emily couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy every time she glanced outside. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. "I'm going to give it some water," she declared, grabbing a bowl from the kitchen cabinet. Mark groaned. "Emily, you're just encouraging it." "Maybe," she said, filling the bowl at the sink. "But I can't just ignore it." She stepped outside cautiously, the cool night air brushing against her skin. The dog lifted its head as she approached, its ears perking up. Emily stopped a few feet away, crouching down to place the bowl of water on the ground. "Here you go, boy or girl," she said softly. "You must be thirsty." The dog hesitated for a moment, its eyes flicking between her and the bowl. Then, slowly, it rose to its feet and approached, its movements deliberate and unthreatening. It sniffed the bowl before lapping up the water, its tail wagging faintly. Emily smiled, a sense of relief washing over her. "See? Not so scary," she murmured. When she went back inside, Mark was waiting for her with his arms crossed. "You're too soft," he said, though his tone was more amused than annoyed. "Maybe," Emily replied, closing the door behind her. "But it's not like I invited it in." Mark chuckled, shaking his head. Yet, the next morning, Emily awoke to the sound of Lily's cheerful babbling. She stretched and yawned before getting out of bed, her mind immediately turning to the dog. She pulled aside the curtains and peered outside. To her surprise, the dog was still there, lying in the same spot on the porch. It lifted its head when it saw her, its tail wagging slightly. "Persistent, aren't you?" she murmured. After getting Lily dressed and fed, Emily decided to take her out for some fresh air. She placed her in the stroller and stepped onto the porch, pausing as the dog stood up and wagged its tail more enthusiastically. It didn't approach, but its gaze was fixed on Lily. Emily bit her lip, debating what to do. Finally, she spoke. "Okay, you can come with us, but only for the walk." The dog seemed to understand. It fell into step beside the stroller as Emily began to walk, keeping a respectful distance but never straying too far. As they moved through the neighborhood, Emily noticed the reactions of her neighbors, some curious, others wary. She stopped to chat with Mrs. Collins, who was tending to her garden. "Is that your dog?" Mrs. Collins asked, nodding toward the stray. "No," Emily replied. "It just showed up yesterday. It won't leave us, or Lily, to be precise." Mrs. Collins frowned, wiping her hands on her apron. "I've seen it around before. Always seemed like a good dog, but I never knew who it belonged to. Maybe it's been abandoned." Emily's heart sank at the thought. She glanced at the dog, which was sitting patiently by the stroller, its gaze fixed on Lily. "If that's the case, I don't know what to do. We weren't planning on having a dog." "Well, it seems like it's already decided it's part of your family," Mrs. Collins said with a chuckle. "Sometimes they choose us." The thought stayed with Emily as she continued the walk. By the time they returned home, she found herself looking at the dog in a new light. It wasn't just a stray. It was a survivor, a creature that had likely endured hardships she couldn't imagine. And yet, it had chosen to stay with them, drawn to Lily in a way that was both mysterious and heartwarming. As the days passed, the dog became a fixture in their lives. It followed Emily and Lily on their walks, sat vigilantly by the porch, and even wagged its tail when Mark returned home from work, though he still regarded it with mild skepticism. One evening, as they were sitting on the porch, Mark spoke up. "We should at least try to find its owner," he said. "It might belong to someone who's missing it." Emily nodded. "I've thought about that. Maybe we can post on social media or put up flyers." They decided to start the next day, taking a photo of the dog and posting it on local community groups online. They also printed flyers and pinned them to nearby lampposts and bulletin boards. But as the days turned into a week, no one came forward to claim the dog. "It's like it just appeared out of nowhere," Mark said one evening, scratching his head. "Maybe it was meant to find us," Emily suggested, half joking. But the more she thought about it, the more the idea resonated with her. The dog's attachment to Lily was undeniable, and its calm, protective presence had become a source of comfort for the family. One night, as Emily was putting Lily to bed, she heard a commotion outside. She hurried to the window and saw the dog standing in the front yard, barking loudly. It was the first time she had ever heard it bark, and her heart raced as she tried to figure out what was happening. Mark rushed outside, flashlight in hand. The dog was positioned near the edge of the yard, its body tense and its gaze fixed on something in the shadows. When Mark shone the flashlight, he saw a raccoon rummaging through their trash cans. The animal froze for a moment before scurrying away into the night. Mark let out a breath of relief, turning to the dog. "Good job," he said, his tone filled with newfound respect. "You really are keeping an eye on us, aren't you?" The dog wagged its tail, its body relaxing as it trotted back to the porch. Mark followed, sitting down on the steps and patting the dog's head for the first time. "I guess you're not so bad after all," he murmured. Inside, Emily watched the interaction from the window, a smile tugging at her lips. She had always believed the dog was special, but now it seemed like Mark was beginning to see it too. The morning light streamed through the windows as Emily carried Lily downstairs, her little girl babbling happily in her arms. The familiar sight of the dog curled up on the porch greeted her, its tail thumping against the wooden boards as it saw them. Over the past week, the dog's presence had gone from unusual to comforting, and Emily couldn't imagine starting the day without its quiet, watchful gaze. "Good morning," Emily said softly as she opened the door. The dog stood and wagged its tail, stepping closer but stopping just short of the threshold, as if it instinctively knew the boundary between their world and its own. Emily set Lily in her stroller and rolled it out onto the porch. The dog immediately took its place beside the stroller, its stance protective yet relaxed. It had become a ritual now, the morning walk with Lily and the stray dog that seemed to have adopted them. As they walked through the neighborhood, Emily couldn't help but notice how other residents greeted the dog. Some waved and smiled, while others stopped to pet it, remarking on how calm and friendly it was. It was clear that the dog had been a fixture in the area long before it found its way to their porch. One neighbor, Mr. Green, who lived a few houses down, approached them with a knowing smile. "That dog's been around for months," he said, scratching his beard. "Always wandering but never causing trouble. It's like it's got its own rules, never crosses the line." "Do you know where it came from?" Emily asked, curious. Mr. Green shook his head. "No idea. But I'll tell you one thing. It's a smart one. I've seen it help kids cross the street, even stop cars by standing in the road. It's almost like it's looking out for everyone." Emily glanced at the dog, which was now sitting beside the stroller, its eyes scanning the surroundings. She felt a pang of admiration, and something deeper, something she couldn't quite put into words. This wasn't just a stray. It was a guardian. Later that afternoon, Emily decided to do some research. While Lily napped in her crib, she sat at the dining table with her laptop, scrolling through posts in local community groups. She searched for any mention of the dog, hoping to piece together its story. To her surprise, there were dozens of posts about it. People had shared photos of the dog sitting outside shops, walking alongside children on their way to school, and even standing vigil near a busy intersection. The comments were filled with speculation. Some people thought it had been abandoned, while others believed it had once belonged to someone in the neighborhood. One comment stood out to Emily. It was from a woman named Sarah, who claimed the dog had appeared shortly after a tragic accident months ago. According to her, a family in the area had been in a car crash, and their child, a baby, had not survived. The dog had been spotted near the site of the accident shortly afterward and had been wandering ever since. Emily's heart sank as she read the comment. Could this be the same dog? Was it possible that it had been connected to the family in some way, and that it was now seeking solace or a new purpose? She closed her laptop, her mind racing. The pieces didn't quite fit, but the idea lingered. She glanced toward the porch, where the dog was lying in its usual spot, its head resting on its paws. There was a sadness in its eyes, a quiet, unspoken grief that seemed to mirror the story she had just read. That evening, Emily shared what she had learned with Mark. They sat together in the living room, the soft glow of the lamp casting long shadows on the walls. It's possible, Mark said, leaning back in his chair. Dogs are loyal. If it lost its family, maybe it's been trying to find someone to protect ever since. Emily nodded, her fingers tracing the edge of her mug. It explains a lot, doesn't it? Why it's so attached to Lily, why it's so protective. Maybe it sees her as a second chance. Mark was quiet for a moment, his gaze thoughtful. Do you think it's happy, staying here with us? Emily looked toward the door, where the dog's shadow was visible through the curtains. I think it is, she said softly, and I think it chose us for a reason. Mark reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. Then maybe it's time we stop thinking of it as just a stray. The next day, they decided to bring the dog inside for the first time. It was a decision they had been hesitant to make, but one that now felt inevitable. The dog had become a part of their lives, and it was time to make that official. Emily opened the door and knelt down, holding out her hand. Come on, she said gently. It's okay. The dog tilted its head, its amber eyes scanning her face as if searching for permission. After a moment's hesitation, it stepped forward, crossing the threshold for the first time. Emily's heart swelled as it sniffed the air, its tail wagging cautiously. Lily, who was sitting on a blanket in the living room, let out an excited squeal when she saw the dog. She clapped her hands, her face lighting up with pure joy. The dog approached her slowly, its movements careful and deliberate, as if it understood how fragile she was. Mark watched from the kitchen doorway, a small smile tugging at his lips. Well, he said, looks like it's official. They gave the dog a bath that afternoon, washing away months of dirt and grime to reveal a beautiful coat of soft brown and white fur. Its transformation was remarkable, and Emily couldn't help but marvel at how much younger and healthier it looked. You're a handsome boy, she said, scratching behind its ears. The dog wagged its tail, leaning into her touch. Lily watched the entire process with wide eyes, giggling every time the dog shook off water. By the time they were done, it was clear to everyone that the dog had found its place, not just in their home, but in their hearts. As the days turned into weeks, the dog, now affectionately named Buddy, became an integral part of the family. It followed Emily and Lily on their walks, played in the yard with Mark, and even slept at the foot of Lily's crib, its watchful eyes never straying far from her. But there was one moment that solidified Buddy's role as more than just a pet. One afternoon, as Emily was in the kitchen preparing lunch, she heard Lily let out a sharp cry from the living room. She dropped the knife she was holding and rushed to her daughter, her heart pounding. When she entered the room, she found Lily sitting on the floor, her face red and tear-streaked. Buddy was standing in front of her, his body tense and his gaze fixed on the sliding glass door that led to the backyard. Emily followed his gaze and froze. A large snake had slithered onto the patio, its body coiled and its head raised. It wasn't inside the house, but it was close enough to send a shiver down her spine. Buddy let out a low growl, his body positioning itself between Lily and the threat. Emily quickly scooped up her daughter, her hands shaking as she backed away. Buddy, no, she whispered, fear gripping her. But Buddy didn't move. He stayed perfectly still, his growl deepening as the snake inched closer to the glass. It was a standoff, one that felt like it lasted an eternity. Finally, the snake turned and slithered away, disappearing into the bushes. Buddy relaxed immediately, his tail wagging as he turned to Emily and Lily, his expression calm and reassuring. Emily let out a shaky breath, tears streaming down her face as she hugged Buddy tightly. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You're our hero." From that moment on, there was no doubt in her mind that Buddy had been meant to find them. He wasn't just a stray. He was a guardian, a protector, and a member of their family. The days after Buddy's brave act passed with a renewed sense of gratitude and awe in Emily and Mark's household. The snake incident had left Emily shaken, but it had also solidified her belief that Buddy was more than just a dog. He was a protector, always vigilant and deeply connected to their family. Buddy's presence seemed to bring an extra layer of peace to their home. Lily, in particular, adored him. She giggled whenever Buddy licked her tiny hands, and she often reached out from her stroller to touch his fur during their walks. The bond between them was undeniable, and Emily couldn't help but marvel at how natural it felt, as though Buddy had been part of their lives all along. One afternoon, as Emily sat in the living room watching Lily play with her toys, she noticed something unusual. Buddy was lying near Lily, as he often did, but his posture was different. He wasn't relaxed. His ears were perked, and his gaze was fixed on the window. A low, almost imperceptible growl rumbled in his throat. Emily followed his gaze and saw a figure standing near the edge of their front yard. It was a man, tall and scruffy, wearing a tattered jacket. He was leaning against the mailbox, his head down as if he were studying something in his hands. Emily's pulse quickened. The man didn't look familiar, and something about his presence made her uneasy. "Mark," she called, her voice steady but firm. Mark appeared from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "What's up?" Emily pointed toward the window. "There's someone outside. I don't recognize him." Mark frowned, stepping closer to the window. He studied the man for a moment before turning back to Emily. "Stay here with Lily," he said. "I'll go check it out." As Mark opened the front door, Buddy shot to his feet, his body tense and his tail raised. He positioned himself between Mark and the door, letting out a sharp bark. It was the first time Emily had seen Buddy act so assertive, and it only heightened her sense of unease. "It's okay, Buddy," Mark said, his voice calm. "I'll handle it." Buddy hesitated, his eyes flicking between Mark and the man outside. Finally, he stepped aside, but his body remained rigid, his attention unwavering. Mark walked onto the porch, his footsteps deliberate as he approached the man. "Can I help you?" he called out, his tone firm but polite. The man looked up, his expression blank. He held up a piece of paper, squinting at it as he spoke. "I'm looking for an address," he said. Got turned around. "Thought this might be it." Mark stepped closer, keeping a safe distance as he glanced at the paper. It was crumpled and hard to read, but it didn't seem threatening. "This isn't the place," he said. "You'll want to head 2 streets over." The man nodded, shoving the paper into his pocket. "Thanks," he muttered before turning and walking away. Mark watched him go, his brow furrowed. Something about the encounter didn't sit right with him, but the man hadn't done anything overtly suspicious. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that Buddy had sensed something he hadn't. When Mark returned inside, Buddy greeted him with a wagging tail, but his eyes still held a hint of tension. "Good boy," Mark said, patting his head. "You've got good instincts." Emily exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "What was that about?" "Just someone looking for an address," Mark said, though his tone wasn't entirely convincing. "But Buddy didn't like him, and I trust Buddy." Emily nodded, hugging Lily a little tighter. "So do I." That evening, as the family settled in for dinner, Buddy lay by the sliding glass door, his body relaxed but his ears still alert. The light from the kitchen cast a warm glow across the room, and the scent of roasted vegetables filled the air. It was a scene of comfort and normalcy, but the earlier encounter lingered in the back of Emily's mind. "Do you think we should report it?" she asked, breaking the silence. Mark looked up from his plate. "Report what? A guy asking for directions?" Emily hesitated. "I don't know. It just felt off." And Buddy's reaction wasn't normal. "He's never barked like that before." Mark nodded thoughtfully. "We can mention it to the neighborhood watch. Maybe they've seen him around." They agreed to send a message to the neighborhood watch group that night, detailing the encounter and Buddy's unusual behavior. It wasn't much, but it gave Emily a sense of relief to know that others would be keeping an eye out. As the days passed, the incident faded into the background. Life returned to its usual rhythm, and Buddy continued to prove himself as an indispensable part of the family. He was always by Lily's side, whether she was playing in the living room or napping in her crib. His calm, steady presence was a source of comfort for Emily and Mark, who had grown to rely on him more than they realized. One sunny afternoon, Emily decided to take Lily and Buddy to the park. The air was crisp, and the leaves on the trees had begun to turn vibrant shades of orange and red. It was the perfect day for a stroll, and Emily was eager to give Lily some time outdoors. As they walked, Buddy stayed close to the stroller, his tail wagging happily. Other families and their pets dotted the park, creating a lively, cheerful atmosphere. Lily clapped her hands excitedly as she watched children play on the swings and slides. Emily found a bench near the playground and sat down, letting Lily out of the stroller to crawl on the grass. Buddy lay beside her, his eyes following Lily's every move. He seemed completely at ease, his demeanor as calm and protective as ever. But as Emily watched her daughter play, she couldn't shake the feeling that Buddy's watchfulness went beyond simple loyalty. It was almost as if he understood his role in their family on a deeper level, like he had chosen them for a reason. She reached down to scratch his ears, smiling as he leaned into her touch. "You're a special one, aren't you?" she murmured. Buddy looked up at her, his amber eyes filled with an intelligence that never failed to take her breath away. It was as if he knew exactly what she was saying, and he responded with a soft wag of his tail. That night, as Emily tucked Lily into bed, she thought about how much their lives had changed since Buddy had arrived. He had brought more than just protection. He had brought love, comfort, and a sense of purpose that had transformed their home. After Lily was asleep, Emily joined Mark on the couch, where he was scrolling through his phone. "Guess what?" he said, holding up the screen. The neighborhood watch posted an update. They caught that guy from the other day acting suspicious near another house. Emily's eyes widened. "What happened?" Mark shrugged. "Nothing serious, but he was loitering in someone's driveway. They called the police, and he ran off before they could question him." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. So Buddy was right to bark at him. "Looks like it," Mark said, glancing toward the sliding glass door, where Buddy was lying with his head resting on his paws. "We've got a good one." Emily smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. "We really do." As they sat together in the quiet of the evening, Emily thought about how much Buddy had changed their lives. He wasn't just a dog. He was family. A loyal, loving guardian who had brought them closer together in ways they hadn't expected. And as Buddy lifted his head to look at them, his tail thumping softly against the floor, Emily knew he felt the same way. The days continued to pass, and Buddy's place in the family became even more solidified. He had gone from a stray on their porch to an irreplaceable part of their daily lives. His constant vigilance, gentle demeanor, and unshakable loyalty had earned him a special spot in everyone's hearts, especially Lily's. Lily's bond with Buddy had only grown stronger. She often reached for him when she was upset, and Buddy responded with a nuzzle or a wag of his tail that instantly calmed her. At night, he would lie near her crib, his ears perked and his body still, as if standing guard while she slept. One evening, Emily sat in the living room with Buddy lying at her feet. She was scrolling through her phone, reading comments on a post she had made about Buddy in the local community group. Her post had detailed how Buddy had appeared, his protective instincts, and the incredible bond he'd formed with Lily. To her surprise, the post had garnered hundreds of likes and comments from people who were moved by the story. "He's become a bit of a local hero," Mark said, peering over her shoulder at the screen. Emily smiled, scrolling through the comments. Many people shared similar stories of how their pets had changed their lives, while others expressed admiration for Buddy's unwavering loyalty. One comment, however, stood out. "I think I've seen this dog before. If it's the same one, he used to belong to an elderly man who lived near the park. The man passed away a year ago, and the dog disappeared soon after. Could it be him? Emily's heart skipped a beat as she reread the comment. Mark, she said, her voice quiet. What if Buddy had an owner before us? Someone who didn't make it? Mark frowned, leaning back in his chair. It's possible. It would explain why he seems so attached to people. Why he's so protective. Emily chewed her lip, deep in thought. Do you think he's still searching for them? Or maybe he's found us because he needed a new purpose? Mark reached down to scratch Buddy behind the ears. I don't know, he said softly. But one thing's for sure, he chose us. The next day, Emily decided to follow up on the comment. She messaged the person who had written it, hoping to learn more about Buddy's past. To her surprise, they responded quickly, confirming that they had seen a dog matching Buddy's description with the elderly man several times before his passing. He was such a sweet dog, the message read. The man used to walk him around the park every morning. After the man passed, I heard the dog went missing. It's heartbreaking, but I'm glad to see he's found a new family. Emily felt a lump rise in her throat as she read the message. She looked at Buddy, who was lying by the window with his head resting on his paws, and felt an overwhelming wave of gratitude. He had lost so much, yet he had found his way to them, bringing love and protection into their lives when they needed it most. She showed the message to Mark that evening. It all makes sense now, she said. Why he's so calm, so well-behaved. He must have been loved deeply by his previous owner. Mark nodded, his expression somber. And when he lost that, he found us. It's like he's been carrying that love forward. Emily smiled, tears welling in her eyes. And now it's our turn to love him back. That weekend, Emily and Mark decided to take Buddy and Lily to the park where the elderly man had once walked him. They hoped it might bring some closure to Buddy's story, or at least give him a chance to revisit a place that might hold meaning for him. The park was bustling with activity when they arrived. Children laughed as they played on the swings, joggers passed by with earbuds in their ears, and families gathered for picnics under the shade of tall oak trees. Buddy seemed excited, his tail wagging as he sniffed the air and looked around. As they strolled through the park, Buddy suddenly stopped, his ears perking up. He looked around, his amber eyes scanning the area as if searching for something. Emily and Mark exchanged a glance, unsure of what had caught his attention. What is it, Buddy? Emily asked, kneeling beside him. But Buddy didn't respond. Instead, he began walking toward a small bench near the edge of the park, his movements purposeful and steady. When they reached the bench, Buddy stopped and sat down, his gaze fixed on the empty seat. Emily's breath caught as she realized what was happening. This was the spot where the elderly man had likely sat during their walks. Buddy had remembered. Emily knelt beside him, placing a hand on his back. Is this where you used to come? She asked softly. Buddy let out a quiet whine, his eyes never leaving the bench. Mark joined them, placing a comforting hand on Emily's shoulder. He hasn't forgotten, Mark said. Even after everything, he still remembers. They sat there for a while, letting Buddy have his moment. Lily, oblivious to the weight of the moment, giggled and reached for Buddy, who turned to nuzzle her hand. It was a bittersweet scene, a reminder of the love Buddy had lost, but also of the new family he had found. In the weeks that followed, Buddy seemed lighter, as if revisiting the park had given him a sense of closure. He was still the same loyal, protective dog, but there was a new playfulness to his demeanor. He wagged his tail more often, chased after sticks in the yard, and even let Lily climb on his back during their playtime. For Emily and Mark, Buddy's presence continued to bring immeasurable joy. He had become more than a pet. He was a symbol of resilience, love, and the unexpected ways life could bring people and dogs together. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, Emily turned to Mark with a smile. You know, she said, Buddy taught me something important. Mark raised an eyebrow. Oh yeah? What's that? Emily reached down to scratch Buddy's ears, her voice soft. That love doesn't end when we lose someone. Keeps going. Finds new ways to grow. Mark nodded, his gaze thoughtful. And Buddy found us, he said. Maybe we needed him just as much as he needed us. Buddy looked up at them, his amber eyes filled with a quiet understanding. He wagged his tail, his way of saying he agreed. The bond between Buddy and the family deepened as the months passed. The initial mystery of his appearance had been replaced by a profound sense of belonging. Buddy wasn't just a dog anymore. He was family, as integral to their lives as any human member of the household. Lily had grown more mobile and adventurous, crawling and pulling herself up on furniture. Wherever she went, Buddy was never far behind. If she tottered too close to something dangerous, a sharp edge, a staircase, Buddy would gently position himself to block her, his amber eyes watchful and steady. One afternoon, as Emily was folding laundry in the living room, she heard a loud crash from the kitchen. Her heart leapt as she rushed toward the sound, only to find Lily sitting on the floor, startled but unharmed. A glass jar had fallen from the counter, shattering into pieces around her. Buddy stood between Lily and the broken glass, his body shielding her completely. He let out a soft whine as Emily approached, his gaze flicking between her and Lily, as if asking for reassurance that everything was okay. Emily scooped Lily into her arms, her hands trembling. "Thank you, Buddy," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You're amazing." Buddy wagged his tail, his eyes softening as he nuzzled Lily's foot. It was moments like these that reminded Emily just how special he was. A guardian in every sense of the word. As Buddy's story continued to circulate in the neighborhood, he became something of a local legend. Neighbors would stop by to visit him, bringing treats and sharing stories of their own encounters with the loyal dog. Children in the area loved him, often running up to pet him during walks or calling out his name from their yards. One day, the local newspaper reached out to Emily and Mark, asking if they could feature Buddy in an article. The journalist, a kind woman named Grace, visited their home to interview them and meet Buddy. She sat on the porch with a notebook in hand, her eyes lighting up as Emily recounted the story of how Buddy had appeared and the incredible role he now played in their lives. "He's more than just a dog," Emily said, stroking Buddy's fur as he lay beside her. "He's part of our family, and he's taught us so much about love, loyalty, and second chances." Grace smiled, jotting down notes. "It's clear he's special," she said. "Stories like his remind people of the good in the world. I think this will inspire a lot of readers." The article was published a week later, featuring a photo of Buddy sitting proudly beside Lily's stroller. The headline read, "From Stray to Guardian. The Dog That Chose a Family." The story quickly gained attention, with people from nearby towns reaching out to share their own experiences with Buddy or to express their admiration for his loyalty. For Emily and Mark, the response was overwhelming but heartwarming. They received letters, emails, and even small gifts for Buddy, new collars, toys, and handwritten notes thanking him for being a source of hope. As the seasons changed and the crisp air of autumn gave way to the chill of winter, the family settled into a comfortable routine. Buddy seemed to thrive in the colder months, often bounding through the snow with Lily bundled up in her stroller. He would chase snowflakes, his breath puffing in the air, while Lily clapped and giggled from her seat. One snowy afternoon, as Emily and Mark watched Buddy and Lily play in the yard, Emily turned to Mark with a thoughtful expression. "Do you think Buddy knows how much he means to us?" she asked. Mark smiled, slipping an arm around her shoulders. "I think he does," he said, "but it wouldn't hurt to show him." That evening, after putting Lily to bed, they surprised Buddy with a special dinner. Grilled chicken and rice served in a shiny new bowl. Buddy's tail wagged furiously as he devoured the meal, pausing occasionally to look up at them with what could only be described as gratitude. "You deserve it, Buddy," Emily said, laughing as he licked her hand. "You've given us so much. It's the least we can do." The year came to an end, and as the family prepared for the holidays, they couldn't help but reflect on how much their lives had changed since Buddy arrived. What had started as a chance encounter with a stray dog had turned into one of the greatest blessings they had ever known. On Christmas morning, Lily toddled toward the tree, her tiny hands reaching for the brightly wrapped presents beneath it. Buddy followed closely, his tail wagging as he sniffed the air. Emily and Mark had made sure to include a few gifts for him: a new leash, a cozy bed, and a squeaky toy that he immediately claimed as his favorite. As they sat together by the fire that evening, Emily couldn't help but feel overwhelmed with gratitude. She looked at Buddy, who was curled up at her feet, and at Lily, who was snuggled in Mark's lap, and felt her heart swell. "You've made our family complete," she said softly, leaning down to kiss Buddy's head. "Thank you for choosing us." Buddy lifted his head, his amber eyes meeting hers. For a moment, it felt as though he understood every word she had said. He wagged his tail, his way of saying, "Thank you for loving me." Buddy's story didn't end there. Over the years, he continued to be a source of love, joy, and protection for the family. Lily grew up with him by her side, her earliest memories filled with his warmth and gentle presence. He was there for every milestone, her first steps, her first day of school, and every scraped knee and tearful moment in between. For Emily and Mark, Buddy was a constant reminder of the unexpected ways life could bring people and animals together. He had come into their lives when they least expected it, and he had changed them for the better. And though they never fully uncovered all the details of Buddy's past, it didn't matter. What mattered was the present, the love they shared and the life they had built together. Buddy had chosen them, and in return, they had given him a home. But in truth, he had given them so much more. As the years went on, Buddy's story became a cherished memory in the community, a tale passed down to remind people of the power of loyalty, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between a family and their dog. And in the quiet moments, when the house was still and the world seemed far away, Emily would sit with Buddy, her hand resting on his fur, and whisper the words she hoped he understood. "You'll always be our hero,